Ladies and gentlemen, dear talents, a warm welcome again. It's great to be your host again. I'm coming in and out this afternoon, and I'm happy to see so many people, I think even up to this upper balcony. Thank you very much for joining. This session is now within the framework of the Drama Series Days, and as you probably know, that's something that we do together with the festival, together with the European film market, and it is because there is an immense interest in the meantime on drama series, not only for those who are doing it, but also for those who are doing film. I heard just classical film sometimes. Because you can learn a lot and you can extend a lot about how you do storytelling, how you do it, how you do production. And so we are happy to include this within the framework of our program. And this session has a special dedication as well, because it's also dedicated to cinematography, and it's dedicated to wonderful series and many other things. And I'm very happy now to introduce you to the moderator. He's knowing this place very well, and he's now coming from the stage of business, so the European film market. Please welcome the director of the European film market, Matthijs Wouter Knoll.
Good afternoon. Great to see all of you coming to this very special series, and thank you, Florian, for introducing the series, which is in the framework, as said, of the Drama Series Days, the highlights of drama series from all over the world. And this year at Talents, an opportunity to not only look at those series and get a feeling of what those new series will be for the next years, but also to have a feeling of how these series are made. We focus today on, I think, one of the series that has reached like an enormous amount of people all around the world. I think most of the people are waiting for the next season, the 6th season, to start later on in April. So we focus today, need not say more, Game of Thrones. We're very lucky today because we have not only one expert, but actually two experts. When the experts heard that one of the DOPs will be joining us today, one of the other DOPs said, actually I want to join because I want to talk about it as well. I'm going to introduce them to you. First of all, we have Fabian Wagner, who's a German-born cinematographer who has actually been working on quite some British TV series before. He's also based in London, before working on Game of Thrones. So he worked, for example, on Robert Carlyle's BAFTA-winning Barty Thompson, or Paul McGuigan's Victor Frankenstein. He was nominated twice for a Prime Time Emmy Award for his work on Sherlock and also for Game of Thrones. And he's joined today by Jonathan Freeman from Canada, also nominated for quite some awards, worked on TV movies, and also worked with Steven Spielberg on the miniseries Taken. He has done quite some other shows, including, and I have to read those ones because there are quite a number, Rescue Me, Rome, Sons of Anarchy, and Damages. And his extensive work of Game of Thrones and also on BOARDWALK Empire got him 3 Primetime Emmys and 5 ASC Awards. So we have people who know what they are talking about, are very, very experienced in working on series, and we're going to ask them everything. You can ask them everything. And please, a warm welcome for Fabian Wagner and Jonathan Freeman. Welcome to both of you. We have a chance to actually learn a lot. I'm sure that most of the people in the audience know Game of Thrones quite well. Let's do a quick test. Who has seen all the seasons so far of Game of Thrones? There's also people sitting upstairs, even in the second balcony, so it's full. That means we know a lot about your work. We see your work. I think that's a luxury that not always happens with people sitting on the stage. And I'm quite curious, and I think most of the people here as well, to know a little bit about how you guys are working, how you got to work for Game of Thrones, but also I think everybody realizes, and I think that's quite clear, with the whole range of stories being told within the series, with all the different locations, with the huge crews that you're working on, also the huge budgets. I think it would be great if you could share a little bit in the next 90 minutes about how you guys manage to do that and how you keep us sitting on the tip of our chair to watch the next seasons, because you're part of that. Jonathan, maybe we can start with you. Maybe you can say something just to start with. How did you start working on Game of Thrones? What brought you to the team?
Well, I had worked on a number HBO projects before. I was working on Boardwalk Empire and also Rome. And some of the people involved in Game of Thrones were working on the first season. When the second season came about, they were looking for other cinematographers to come in to jump forward, and my name was presented, and I was lucky to get a spot in the team, and yeah, it's I guess through previous connections I was able to get the opportunity.
So that means basically you got involved. Did it mean that in the beginning you were working like on a number of episodes, or did it like increase, or how does it work? Because there's quite a number. You're not the only two DOPs of Game of Thrones. How many people are you guys working with when it comes to the DP team?
Well, each season has had various numbers of DPs based just on scheduling and whatnot. Typically, the way our seasons will break down now is that we may have as many 5 cinematographers who work with a director and an AD, or probably more appropriately said, a director who has a cinematographer and an AD that works with them, shooting 2 episodes. That way, there's a consistency within communication in terms of pre-production, and basically that group of 3 will prep together and move around together between 2 different units that are shooting simultaneously. It's a very unique schedule, and very impressively done by Chris Newman, one of our producers, who manages to, along with Brittany Caulfield, who's also one of our producers, to schedule between different countries, different set pieces, different actor availabilities, and somehow make it all work. And when you first see a schedule, it's the most mind-boggling thing you'd ever seen, because it's all color coordinated. So each team has a certain color, and then that, it basically has a schedule, like a calendar, where your colors indicated what scene you might be shooting, or scenes you might be shooting in one day. It's basically a very mosaic map that looks very confusing at first, but it's intimidating actually at first. So
it's a bit like the Dine and Shine system, actually. You have colors and you move to different paper. It's like an event that would happen like 2 days ago, with also tables and colors. Yeah. We're going to watch quite some content actually of Game of Thrones, but before we start throwing some clips into the room, Fabian, maybe you can say something about how you joined the Game of Thrones gang.
Sure. I actually have got no idea how I got into the show. I was shooting in Canada on a pilot, and I suddenly had a phone call from my agent saying that David Benioff and Dan Weiss want to have a chat. And what happened was basically they really liked my episode of Sherlock, which that was the one I was also nominated for an Emmy, so that was great because it exposed me to the States a little bit more. And so yeah, I had a Skype chat with them for about 10 minutes, and at the end they said, "We'd love you to come and shoot." So I started season 4 and have been there since then.
So there is, I know there's one other German member as well of the DOP team, Annette Helmig. Is there other like European people, a lot of European people on like the DOP team? I mean, I know it's like quite a mixture and a very international mix of people working on that series.
The Canadians are very strong, I think.
Yeah, it's a kind of unusual combination of Canadians and Germans. It's sort of happened that way, but there's no reason for that. It's not a co-production for companies. There's no economical reason. It's just kind of fell in that way. Yeah, no, I don't know. It's pretty well evenly represented. I think there's a number of British or Irish DPs who've worked as well on the project, and I
think it's less about where we all come from. I think it's more of a personality. Everybody's very similar, which I think is very important for the producers of the show and also for us. So.
I mean, it's an interesting thing because apart from the crew, I think being very international, even though there's a highlight in Canadians and Germans working on the show, also when you look at the pool of actors, which is extremely international, but still, I think Game of Thrones is one of the examples where it's managed quite well to create a consistent look when it comes to the locations, when it comes to the atmosphere of the different parts of the Seven Kingdoms. But also when it comes to the actors, each of them having their own accents, which actually is perfectly logical if you're aware of the fact that we're talking about a huge piece of the world, I guess. That's also a topic that we're going to talk about because I think when we think about all those locations and the different people ruling those places or fighting each other or whatever they're doing in these places, we can actually recognize already in the first shot, I would say, or with the light that we see, we know we're either in the north or in the south or wherever we are. That's something I think that specifically relates to the work you are doing, and I think in the level of storytelling and guiding people through this very complex string of stories, light, cinematography, locations, is extremely important. Let's maybe start watching with a clip. So based on the clips that we can see, we can pick some of these topics, and I'm sure you'll have some questions at some point about that as well. Let's watch the first clip, which is Jonathan, I think from the second season.
Yeah, I think it's the season finale of season 2, and it's Daenerys walking through a throne room. It's actually part of a sequence that's somewhat almost like a dream-like sequence when she is sort of being interrogated by, I've forgotten the character's name anyway. There's so many characters to remember. Jesus.
We'll help you.
Yeah, but anyway, this is actually just part of that sequence.
Let's watch a clip. Jonathan, can you say something about, I mean, this is probably a different location, but can you say something about where this was shot and what of it is visual effects and what you actually shot?
Sure, this is actually our standard throne room that we've had since the pilot episode. In fact, it was an inherited set, I believe, that was retrofitted for the show. And it's shot in Belfast, as most of our interior spaces are shot. So it's a standard set, but as you can see in the sequence clip, of course, there's a ceiling that doesn't exist or is, it's sort of destroyed somewhat. So the actual set itself is, of course, only maybe 2/3 of what you see in the frame, and then they did a visual effects extension on it. So part of the process for that sequence was that the throne room itself had never been sort of lit in a cool tone or sort of winterly tone, if you will, before, obviously for obvious reasons, because it's set in King's Landing, which is this very warm climate, and tonally we've always kept that to feel very warm. Often, having shafts of light coming through windows and very different look to it. So this was, the photographic inspiration of it is simply just to kind of convey that there's actually that not only sort of a winter setting, but the ceiling has caved in. So I just had to kind of reshape the light in order to kind of get that feeling, I guess.
And maybe also, I mean, you when you start shooting, I mean, you read the script, you talk with the directors about what he or she is intending to do. Is there female directors on Game of Thrones? I'm actually not sure. Is there any female directors on Game of Thrones?
Sorry, what was the question?
No, if there's any female directors on Game of Thrones. I normally see men's names, but...
Michelle McLaren.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Michelle's there.
Yeah.
So you get a script, you talk with the director on it. It's quite clear, especially when you join, for example, in your case, Fabian, in the fourth season, that there is this whole setting, this whole like visual language that people relate to, that we know, that we need to know. We see where we are, we recognize this location within the world of the series. How do you, as a cinematographer, how do you add things to that, or how do you come up with ideas? How is that process going between you and the directors? Is it pretty straightforward because you know which sort of like formula, with all respect, you have to shoot?
Well, one thing I would say about this sequence is that the fact that we'd never framed the ceiling before up until that point, because we never had a limited budget. You couldn't build set extensions, and if the story didn't demand it, there was no need for it. So that sequence would have been the first time we have seen the ceiling. And then I was working with Alan Taylor, who's the director, and we discussed this. And we realized that there's an opening sequence in the throne room where Tywin comes in a horse and whatnot. And we realized that we had to find a way to show the ceiling, that there was a ceiling that existed, because in the language of the show, it's important that you understand that there's a ceiling and then it essentially is destroyed. So something like that will come up in a discussion, and it may not be on the page, but then we would implement it in shooting.
Fabian, before we go to the next clip that you have been shooting, can you say something about how, before we watch that clip, how you have been working with the director on that specific scene, and how you sometimes also added maybe new nice things to what was written in the script, or is that not really much the case?
I mean, you always, obviously before you start, you talk to the director and come up with various ideas that will hopefully work to, help the storyline. I mean, I think this next clip is set in the audience chamber, and I mean, what happened with that particular scene was that because we always, all of us are crossing over, we all shoot obviously in the same locations for our episodes, and even though we're obviously trying to have a coherent look throughout the whole show, we're all very different, not only German and Canadian, but we're also creatively different, so each of us, I think, has a, certain approach to things, which we all sort of try and do in the work that we do. And for me, that scene was, in season 4, I lit that set, I think, first, because I had the first. There was a new set built for season 4, and because I was the first one shooting in there, so I kind of was the first one to light it. Obviously, we all talked about it beforehand. And then when it came to season 5, I thought, I really wanted to do something different at that point, so I actually keeled it from the other side, which totally doesn't make sense because it doesn't actually work because there's no windows, but I thought I just wanted to mix it up a little bit. And it also felt, for that scene, it would be nice to start that episode with a slightly different approach.
So we're seeing a scene which I think is shot in Marine, where Daenerys is basically residing and welcoming guests and basically ruling from this like huge,
yeah, it's at the top of a pyramid. It's called the audience chamber.
Exactly. Yeah. So let's see the scene shot in Marine by Fabian. We referred a little bit already to the different locations where you're shooting. You mentioned Ireland, where things are being shot. The other ones I know there's being shot in Croatia as well. I think Dubrovnik is like the set of King's Landing, if I'm not mistaken. Which are the other locations? I'm sure many of people will know. Which are the locations that you're shooting at normally for like a regular episode?
Well, I think you started in. I think season 2 was Morocco, right? So, season 2 was Morocco, then I think in season 3 you moved to Croatia, which then became sort of the main set for the south. Dubrovnik split, and we were also shooting in Šibenik for a few locations. And then last year we actually went to Spain. And then Iceland was quite a main part.
Yeah, we also shot Iceland, I guess it's season two, 3, and 4, I think, yeah. Actually in the summer in season 4, which is interesting, a different look, but, and that was fantastic to do. And yeah, I guess the desert locations had varied from country to country, so it was actually Malta, I think, in this first season.
That's right.
And then, and actually Morocco in season 3 as well, so quite a few.
Is there any new locations being added for the 6th season that we don't know about? A new country you could travel to shot, or is it you're not allowed to say?
Well, Belfast and Spain generally, so nothing new to report there.
Okay, good. Just talking about like the amount of, well, maybe influence, not the right word, but the creativity you can add to the written scripts. I mean, I know that we all know that George R.R. Martin is, like, the series is based on the books, but the books are not going as quick or not as quickly written as the series is actually proceeding. So in the meantime, I think this, I'm not sure if this was the 5th, but the 6th season, I know, is based not on the books anymore, but it is based on actually probably half of the book and the rest of the scripts that he has been involved in. Does that change in some way the way you work? Does it give you more liberty because like there's no book, there's only the script, or it doesn't really make a difference for you?
I don't think it makes a difference to us. I think, I mean, you know, the great thing with Game of Thrones is that it's such a well-written show. I mean, the writing is so tight and it's so well done. Personally, actually, I've never read the books, I have to admit. So, you know, and there's so much visual opportunity within what's already on the page of the script, so it doesn't really affect us, I think, as cinematographers.
I'd like to continue straight away with the next clip. So we have 5 clips in total. So we'll have seen it by half of the session, and then we can continue with some other questions as well. And next clip, Jonathan, is something you shot together with Nicolas Coster-Waldau, Danish actor, playing Jaime Lannister.
That's right.
It's set in a small room, and it appears to me that when we're talking about visual effects, which we'll come back to later on as well, many of the big scenes, including like the wall in the north, so to say, where we just saw Daenerys coming through, is like a lot of visual effects. I'm not sure where that location would be and would exist in the world. Can you say something about the room scene that we're going to see now? Because that's shot by you, and it of course creates a very different atmosphere. How did you prepare that scene, and what were you paying attention to when making that together with the director?
Yeah, so this is a scene between Tywin Lannister and his son, Jaime Lannister. This is, I guess, I think his first episode of season 4. And Jaime's lost his hand and has returned finally after a season and a half, I think, almost, of on the road, to say so to speak. And he's being offered a very special sword, which is basically a sword that was melted down into 2 swords from the sword of Ned Stark, which is significant because it's made of Valyrian steel. So, and it's a pretty simple, you know, kitchen sink scene, to be honest, but it's great to see these actors perform. So,
let's watch the 3rd clip, please. Jonathan, I think this scene also raises another question. We're talking about a world where there is hardly any electric light. So how, I think with this scene it's quite particular. I mean, there's a lot, you do a lot with light, but the rooms are quite dark normally as well. How do you work on that, and how can you say something maybe using this scene on how you're working that basically during the series and shooting the series?
We, as cinematographers, sort of do arrive similarly on the basic approach. You know, if we always want to motivate light if we can. So depending on our scenes that we're supposed to shoot, particularly interiors. It's either going to be daylight interiors, or night interiors. We sort of have a kind of a rule that we kind of try to apply. Sometimes we kind of break it a little bit, but to limit the amount of candlelight, and also just for a look. It was requested from the production to consider not using candlelight during day scenes, and that you can motivate the light through the windows or some other way. Just simply because I think after the first season they spent a lot of money on candles, and so unless we really, really needed them, they wanted to limit the usage, which then kind of is good in some ways because it forces us to kind of figure out how to do things. The scene we just looked at is very, very simple. It's again, plenty of window sources. The choices, sort of color choices that we can make. King's Landing obviously is warm, and so I sort of motivated the light that way, but mixed in with some sort of cooler tones as well, partially to kind of also help give contrast in the set design and the costume design, which of course are absolutely gorgeous and a pleasure to work with every day. So it's just those simple choices that you make, and you go into the same set another time. You usually, every cinematographer wants to try to do something a little different from what they did before. So it's always a journey that way. So.
Fabian, can you say something about working with the production designers? Because there's quite a bunch of production designers, I'm sure, involved in creating this whole world of Westeros and all the specific parts of it. Also there, you see also when the series is evolving, that new things are being added, and like the whole world is rich and becomes richer and richer, I feel. Also including new locations, like you said, Spain. How do you work with them, or is there any way of you knowing in advance or talking with production designers? Are you involved in that process of developing and creating that world?
No, absolutely. We have one production designer, Deb Riley, who's fantastic. I think she also started season 4. All of us were very early on involved in designing new sets. Normally the way it works is that Deb would design a set, it would get sent off to David and Dan for an approval. If they like it, it comes back, and then we all talk about it. We go down there with the director, we look at the set, because obviously from our point of view, it's about the flexibility as much as it is about the look of the actual set. So, we talk about, okay, are we going to be able to move this wall, or can we maybe move that window slightly over there, or maybe can we make the window slightly bigger so we can push the light in slightly further into the room. So there's a lot of factors that we consider before anything gets built. The great thing generally with Game of Thrones and the design is, and I think it's a huge part of the look of the show, is that, I've done a lot of TV stuff in the UK, for example, and, things are small, money isn't, there's not that much money, obviously, so, you shoot you don't build the sets that much, you shoot more in actual locations where there isn't any flexibility and it's smaller. The great thing with Game of Thrones is that anything you see, for example, that scene in the audience chamber, it's a big set, it's actually a huge set, so, you can afford to go big and wide, you can achieve those big shots which set this show probably apart from other shows where you just don't have sets that are that big.
Yeah. Going to another quite big scene at least, which is a battle scene that you shot, Fabian. Maybe we can watch the clip first and then you can say something about how that specific scene was set up, what of it you were involved in, how much of it is also visual effects, and so on. So we move to that topic slowly. Let's see the fourth clip, please. Tell us how you did it.
No idea. Look, it's such a, there's so many people involved in the making of that show, and literally everyone is really playing on the top of the game. I mean, what I love about Game of Thrones and about, you've got the mixture between those really intimate scenes, like we've just seen the one that Jonathan did, you know, which is just two really good actors, and then we have the opportunity to do something like this, which is obviously, you know, a big battle scene. I mean, we were shooting this over 2 weeks, I think, on a set that we built in outside Belfast, in a quarry. Again, everything that you see is built for real. So, you know, for us, that's just incredible to have everything there for real. So we snowed in the whole area, pretty much, and then we just did top-ups and visual effects. Pretty much all the effects that you see, like the wind, the snow, that's all done for real. So we have big wind machines with snow, and I mean, you know, obviously supplemented by visual effects when you need it. When you come to shoot a sequence like this, it becomes much more about organizing the day, trying to be, you know, making sure that you can shoot all the shots that you need to make that sequence work. So we were shooting 4 cameras pretty much constantly all the time, because I really wanted to operate one. Because normally we don't operate on Game of Thrones. We have 2 or 4, 2 operators each for each crew. And I really wanted to operate. So we had 4 cameras, and yeah, we just shot for 2 weeks. We were shooting in November, so the light, we were very tight for light. I think I was there at 5 o'clock every morning in the dark, and we were starting to go through the shots, planning what we were going to do that day. And as soon as it became light enough, we started shooting until 4 o'clock, when it was pretty much dark. And then I went home and just planned the next day, you know, exactly what camera does what. To get all those beats. I think we had 50 stuntmen for two weeks, and about 350 extras.
So shooting the whole scene took 2 weeks?
I think it was roughly about 15 days, yeah.
Okay. And when it comes to visual effects, I mean, you said, okay, much of it, what we see when it comes to snow and wind and everything is real. But when it comes to visual effects, because quite some of it is also visual effects, how do you work with the visual effects team? I mean, are they working on set? Do you see what they plan to do? I mean, of course, you know what it will look like in the end, so you get familiar with that when you're shooting a new scene in the same location. But is it something you are involved in, you can see and then also change or adapt during shooting, or is it something totally done at the end?
No, absolutely. We're involved from the very beginning. With the director. I mean, something like this sequence is, we do a previs on the whole thing, which you need to do for several reasons. One, obviously, is because financially they need to know how much, you know, that sequence is going to cost, and then you can work towards, most of the time, making it cheaper rather than putting more money in. So you need to do a previs for that, and then we all sit together, really, and we go through the sequence, we talk about the shots that we want to do. It helps everyone to know when you turn up on the day, what do we need for that day, you know, everybody knows. I mean, our visual effects team, as Jonathan will confirm, I mean, you know, those guys have won the Emmy, I think, 5 years in a row, so they're really one of the best teams you can get, and we know them very well, we work together very, very well. I mean, you know, especially visual effects-wise, obviously we've got things like the Giant, who's actually a real guy, he's about 7 foot something, I think. So what we do is when we shoot that sequence, we have a green stick, which is, I think, 15 feet high, so actors have an eye line to act against. And then we go on into the stage after the sequence is finished, and we shoot, I think he's called James, I'm not sure, on a miniature stage. So we build miniature sets. So let's say, for example, where he breaks through the hut when he breaks out. We built the front part of that on a half-scale model, and he actually breaks through it, and that then gets put into the final piece.
Okay, we're going to watch the last clip, and then I'd like to, so you can start thinking already, also give you the opportunity to start asking Jonathan and Fabian some questions. The last scene, Jonathan, shot by you, is, I have to check, introducing another character we have not seen yet so far today, Cersei Lannister, talking with her brother. Maybe you can say something before we see this scene?
Really, there's not much to say other than it's, you know, a scene actually, again, I think it's in season 3. Tyrion's in his cell. He's been put there by his father, and he's being visited by his sister, Cersei. And it's, again, more, as you were saying, Fabian, more, some of this, the strength of the show really is actually these two-handers between great actors with beautiful dialogue. So that's essentially what this scene's about. So.
One question maybe before we watch that clip. You both have been working a lot on serial formats, miniseries with different directors and so on. You've been awarded for like series. Is there a specific reason you're working on series? I mean, would you be interested in working on films as well, or is there like it just happened that way and that's how you like it? How's that with you, Jonathan?
Well, for me, it's about. I must say that I'm most intrigued by great writing, and that's the first thing that I look for when I read a script. It should go without saying, but I'm actually, you know, as a cinematographer, more interested in a story that's compelling, characters that are compelling, the cinematography aspect of it, and what I would like to contribute to it is sort of secondary to it. So I'm drawn towards that, and it seems that in the last 10 years, really, the quality of television writing has, you know, gone through the roof, and so my exposure to quality writing generally comes through television. And so, even though I've done movies, I've been selective of the movies that I've made, and you know, I generally like the scripts of the movies I've made. But if an opportunity comes by that's a great script, if it's a television show, to me that it's not as if I don't want to be a film cinematographer. I just at this stage right now have had more opportunities for greatly written television shows.
How's that for you, Fabian?
I think I feel the same. I mean, obviously, you know, I've grown up on watching movies, and watching movies has always made me want to become a cinematographer. But you know, I've shot a couple of movies, and I'm doing a movie next, which is great. But you know, like Jonathan says, I mean, TV has just become so, you know, it's changed so much, and now, you know, with shows like, I mean, Jonathan has shot many more shows that are visually grand, you know, as well. I mean, Rome, for example. You know, the stuff that you can do and the sets that you have, and if you look at, you know, Game of Thrones isn't really a typical TV show. It's, you know, it's opened up the world between TV and film, really. So.
Okay, let's watch the last clip. We have mics in the audience, and please raise your hand if you'd like to ask anything to Jonathan and or Fabian. I'll know there's also people sitting on the 2 balconies, but I can't always see you because there's beautiful light here. So if you're sitting on the 2nd balcony, welcome today as well. Please give shout. So we'll make sure you get a mic too. I'll start downstairs, and I'll start the gentleman here in the front.
Hello, I would like to ask you, I have an impression that you a little bit misuse the good technical characteristic of the current cameras, and sometimes you just don't use the external illumination. It's make really better picture, more natural, but I think that still, even with the contemporary super good cameras, we still need enough additional lighting.
Is that a question?
And, yes, it's a question. It's a question why do you use that? Why they misuse? And which camera? I guess it was Sony F55.
Actually, it's the Alexa we've been using.
Anyway, it's contemporary camera and have very high sensitivity that should not be misused.
That's right. It's we generally set it for 800 ASA, which is the recommended ASA, which is a little bit more latitude than film. Originally the show was being considered to be shot on film, and I'm not sure exactly how it went through the process, but basically they decided to test the Alexa, and the two cinematographers that were in this first season was Marko Pontakova and Alex Sakharov. And after doing the test, they kind of were very impressed and decided that they were going to go that way. And I think it served our show quite well, particularly the amount of footage that we shoot.
You couldn't shoot that show on film, I think.
What's that?
I don't think you could shoot that show on film.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair point. Particularly, the locations that we shoot, and the turnover time that is required for post-production, that's adding days, if not weeks, to post-production, actually. Forget about the cost now. So in the end, it was actually a fortuitous choice to make. In terms of talking about the additional lighting, it's true, but I guess in the case for our show, I don't know how you would like to describe our look, if you will, but it's sort of expressionistic realism, or some kind of bogus term like that. But it does require additional lighting to help shape it and give it, I guess, a more dramatic look. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, though. Yeah, so.
We'll move on. Fabian, do you want to add something to it, or you're fine and you'll come to it later on? Good. Here in the front, 2 questions next to each other.
With different DOPs and art directors working on different seasons, how do you ensure visual consistency throughout the piece?
I mean, like we said earlier, if you're doing a series, you always have to be aware of consistency throughout the show. So, the nice thing about Game of Thrones is that, it's been the same people really for a few years, so we all know each other very well. So also, when you come in as a cinematographer into a series, you come in knowing that you have to adhere to the look that's been set, unless production will change it, obviously. But you need to really follow a string that runs all the way through. So you can go in and we all do our own thing, because obviously we're all very different, but overall we need to stick to the same look, really. And Game of Thrones, first of all, we talk a lot. We all know each other very well, so there's a lot of collaboration between not only us DPs, but also every other crew member. And we have systems. We have a system called Synchronize, where everybody can look on. What's the other one called?
Just picks.
Yeah, it's picks. So we have picks. We use picks, which means all the rushes get put up every day. So I can look at Jonathan's rushes. He can look at my rushes. If I finish in the throne room for my episode, and Jonathan takes it over in his episodes, he can look at my stuff, or vice versa. So we always make sure that it all fits together.
Thank you.
I have a question referring again to film or video. For one, what is the frame rate that we're seeing here now? And is that something that, besides the look of film or versus video, is something that's still being discussed, or is that decided and the taste is assumed to have moved on?
24. It's 24p, so it's basically matching sort of the film look. No, you're talking about in terms of the show itself. Like we obviously won't be considering going back to film, but what was your question exactly?
So 60 frame rate of second. That's
24, yeah.
right, but what had been tried with Hobbit, or that's not aspired as a new form of visual aesthetics anymore, but we're back to 24p and we love it.
Yeah, I guess that was an experiment. Some people liked it, a lot of us didn't, actually. It just looked too crisp, too almost like bad video, honestly. But it was an experiment. I think it's always great to have these experiments. But in a show like this, obviously, we're sticking with what we've done in the past, and I don't think season 6 is 3D, I can tell you that much.
No, and I think that the format that they've been shooting on and the way they've been working it for the past 5 years, I mean, it proves to be successful to production and to post-production, and it works for us on set, so there's no reason to change that. And also, I mean, some of the scenes, like if you look at Hard Home, for example, you're shooting 4 cameras for 2 weeks, and you're constantly shooting. I mean, if you were shooting that on film, you would roll through so much film. For a TV show that has such a quick turnaround, plus all these visual effects, plus for us to be able to see what each other does,
Yeah.
Shooting digitally just means you have a lot more freedom, really, in that sense.
Moving on to the end of the room there, and then we go to the middle here, the gentleman, and then we're going upstairs.
Hi. Fabian, I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about the role of the DIT on Game of Thrones, please.
So yeah, where were you? I can't see you back there. I mean, the DITs for us are hugely important on Game of Thrones. We're very lucky to have some of the best DITs, I would say. I mean, shooting digitally especially, and shooting fast, because we do have to shoot fast in Game of Thrones. It's not like we have a lot of time. You really have to, you're pretty much shooting all day, and you have to turn over quickly. Not only because of the amount of stuff that we have to shoot, but also you want to give the directors as much time as possible with the actors. So the DITs play a huge part, and we had the same guys really for the past few years, which is great because you build up a relationship. They're very creative, which for me is always the most important thing. Technically, that's one thing, but the creativity I think is really important. And I mean, for us, when I work with them, it's really a dialogue between the DIT and me, and we talk about certain ideas. And it's nice to have that relationship because they're honest with me sometimes, and they tell me, no, I don't think that's right. I think you should probably, So it's nice to have that relationship. They're a massive part of that crew.
A question in the middle here, gentlemen.
We all know that this kind of series, it's much more producer-driven than director-driven. I mean, directors come and go, cinematographers come and go, producers stay. My question is, how do you cope with getting the feel of every scene? How much liberty do you have to do your own coverage? Or are you submitted, or are you given kind of directions, do that, do that? I mean, more camera moves in this episode, or more individual shots? How does it go? That's one part of the question. And the other part of the question, a part of the fight scenes, you said you operate. Do you use 2 or 3 cameras on actor scenes, on sets? And then how do you work with the other operators, if you...
2 questions, maybe you start?
Well, I guess, right, the one involved... Okay. Yeah, in terms of dictation of coverage and whatnot, it's actually the directors that they do bring aboard really are respected in terms of their visions. And so unlike your standard TV show, where I guess the tradition is that, the writer is often a producer, and of course has the vision to implement, and as you say, directors, DPs kind of go through the cycle, and there's usually a mandate. This is a kind of a show that's quite different, in particular where we shoot it, as we mentioned before, that you have these teams of director, DP, AD, as if it was almost shooting a movie. there are certain, I guess, since it's a traditional show, I guess the simplest way to describe it, there's certain over-stylized elements that would kind of be maybe rejected, if you will, but usually we'll have enough time to review it so it's not a surprise on the day. The concession might be a director or a cinematographer might have an idea. If we haven't shot a test, if we have the time, we might do a version that would then be, as long as we shoot a safe version, then we can experiment a little bit more. But there is a lot of great respect for the directors, as there should be. I mean, these are really phenomenal directors that are on the show. And the great thing about our team, essentially, is it's a mutual respect. But particularly for us, I think, as people involved, the producers of the show are phenomenal. They're the most amazing producers that I've ever worked with. Just on the complexity of the project, how daunting it is, and yet how they treat everybody with respect as well, and a real pleasure to work with. So that's the producerial question. I guess you can answer the camera.
This man has taught me a lot, by the way, years ago. I'll come back. I guess, yeah, like, I mean, everybody is very respectful of the look of the show, so everybody knows, compositionally and how the show works and what the show is meant to be. It happens sometimes that, you come up with an idea which doesn't quite work, and they tell you off. I've done one such mistake, I think on season 5, where, the director and I looked at the scene and we thought, wow, this is a great opportunity to shoot the scene a certain way, which is what we did. And, our camera operators have been on the show for a long, long time, so our relationship is very close, and they're very good operators. And I sort of double-checked with them both and said, do you think we should do it this way? It's a little bit out of the Game of Thrones style. And they said, yeah, I think this really works for the scene. So we shot it, and we finished a day early, I think. We had a great day. And the first thing that happened when I was sitting in the pub with a pint thinking, what a great day, I had a phone call from the 2 producers saying, what the hell are you doing? This is not what we're doing on the show. Why did you shoot it that way? And they actually made us reshoot the whole day. In the end, that was a good thing because it turned out to be a better scene. But so, you just have to find that the right way sometimes. And because Game of Thrones, because it has an established look, you can't go away from it too much, but you can always try and, go into a little bit of a different direction. You just have to be careful of how much you go. And camera operator-wise, like I just said, those guys have been doing it for a long time. They're very established operators. They've also become friends.
They stay and work with different cinematographers, basically. They are the same operators.
Yes, so basically we have 2 crews. We've got the Dragon crew and the Wolf crew. They both consist of a whole crew. It's 2 full crews. Each crew has 2 camera operators, all the assistants, 1 gaffer, all the sparks, art department, everything, props. And us as the director, DP, AD team, we go in between. So I might shoot, if we're shooting in Belfast, Jonathan might be in the studio with the Dragon crew, and maybe I'm in location on the same day with the Wolf crew. And then a couple of days later we swap, or some other team comes in.
Okay, we're moving on. I'm going to have a look at the balcony. There's 2 questions I see, so let's take the 2 questions from the first balcony. Start there.
You've shot in a lot of harsh climates, Iceland, for example. How did you take that into account? Were there stuff you wanted to do that you just couldn't do because of limitations?
Well, I think the limitations are always one of those things where, like, particularly Iceland, which I had the fortune to, I think, shoot all 3 seasons there, and I'd been there many times before, actually as a visitor, and so the limitations, of course, when you shoot in the winter there, of course, the light is very little light. You might have 7 hours at most, maybe 6.5, really. of light. So it's scheduled reasonably, but we do have to keep everything relatively simple. So particularly some of these locations are hard to get to. They're potentially dangerous, not easy footing. So it's all pre-planned ahead of time. You know, the weather itself is just, you know, you can't do anything about it. And there's been numerous times where we would scout a location, you know, clear day, beautiful background, you know, we're going to set it back this way because of the mountain range and in the vista, you know, the difference, you know, it's just a beautiful, perfect way to frame it. And sure enough, you get there and it's a complete whiteout. So, you know, you have to kind of assume the worst sometimes and hope for the best, really.
And just to add to that, that's another great thing about producers on this show is that, or everyone really, is that they really, I mean, they really listen to us, I think. You know, if in what direction we think would be to shoot best, or, you know, there's a lot of thought for that, plus all the weather, yeah, absolutely. And you can see that all the way through. I mean, I was going to say that earlier, you know, it's the only show I've ever done for TV where in the color grade at the end, for example, they don't make it brighter, but they actually make it darker, yeah. Which is, for us, is a great thing. I mean, I've done so many shows where, you know, you sit, I can't attend the grade, and then I watch it later and I think, this is not what it was meant to be. On this show, they listen to that, they know how important visuals are, and they try to really put that all the way through.
Good, moving on. There's another question here in the front of the balcony.
Hello. Since the show became an even bigger success during the last years, can you tell us how, I mean, 4 cameras seems legit at this budget, but can you tell us how your work changed from the pilot through the 6th season we're now in terms of artistic freedom?
Well, I think in terms of the number of cameras, it's pretty much stayed the same, although, as Fabian mentioned, certain sequences, like an action sequence, brilliant action sequence, Apart Home, required multiple cameras. But in general, we tend to work with just 2 cameras, and also, we don't necessarily shoot 2 cameras simultaneously all the time. It's a choice by the director and or cinematographer, depending how you utilize that team. And I've, you know, often with some of the directors used very much in a cinematic way, where you just have one camera doing one thing, and instead of trying to stick another camera in there for a lesser quality shot, it's being set up for another shot. So there's always, you know, time saving and leapfrogging, but it's not necessarily at the compromise of the shots necessarily. And do you want to add to it? No. Okay.
A third question from upstairs.
You do, that just reminds me of a funny story, because you do get sometimes directors who want to push it a little bit further with, we have this very small set, which is a cell, and I was shooting in there last year with 2 cameras, and my director really wanted to have 2 cameras in there, which was a real nightmare, because it's a tiny space. I mean, it's just, and then, so I had a bit of a really annoying day, and then at the end, the next day I found out that Rob McLachlan, one of our other DPs, was in the same set the next day, and his director made him put 3 cameras into that set. So I thought, okay, well, I got away lightly.
Okay. Go ahead.
Hello. Congratulations to this great work, the first. And then to come to the real creator of it all, of this world, George R.R. Martin. Is there any involvement in the visual terms of the show by him, or advices, or was there a meeting with you and him? I know he did in the first show, he was involved in creating several things. I had the opportunity to meet him once and talk with him about it, but how is there any, because it also comes from television and film working, was there a work together?
There was no obvious blueprint from George regarding the visual look of the show, but certainly it was more related to story and character arcs, and obviously trying to select from the vast, amazing material to tell the story as much as we could on a TV show, basically. But that was really between himself and Dan and David. But in terms of a visual look, he's written it, actually. I mean, in the sense that the settings that are there, even though I only read the first book, but his writing is so vivid and so specific that you can't help feeling that even on a script, even if you haven't read the books. So in a way, he has influenced it just by the nature of the incredible variety of landscapes and worlds that he's created.
So you're not personally approved by George R.R. Martin before you could start working on the show?
I haven't got a note from him yet, so.
I think he's only been on set once,
yeah,
as well. So he doesn't really
yeah,
come to set.
Yeah,
I think he came in season 2 once.
That's right. Yeah.
He has no time anymore because he has to write new novels now anyway.
Right.
Okay, let's move to the third balcony. Please make a bit of a sound. Anybody with a question up there? I don't hear anything. So I move here.
I can see
Question to
I'll come back.
Question to Fabian Wagner regarding Sherlock, because there was a lot of talk about the 5D in regards to Sherlock. Is there, in any episode of Sherlock that you shot, auch nur a single frame of Bewegtbild that has been shot and captured with the 5D, or is that only used for the closes, for the stills?
As in, is there any other moving pictures in the final piece rather than just the stills?
Exactly, a piece of a moving image actually captured with the 5D, or is that 5D only used for the stills, for the closes?
That's a really good. Such a long time ago. I think I threw everything in there that I had. I think there's a GoPro in there. I think there's definitely 5D. There's
also in the moving image material.
Yeah, I think all the stuff that's on the laptop when he's talking to Sherlock, when they find the body, I think all that's 5D. But I'm not that sure anymore.
What was the main camera that you used for shooting that shot?
Sherlock was on the Alexa as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, another chance for upstairs. If you have a mic in your hand, please ask the question.
Hello? Oh, yes. Bringing it back to Game of Thrones, I was wondering how closely you work with the choreographers of the action scenes, and also just like on average for an average scene, how many takes you would do.
Again, I mean, it totally depends on the scene, the amount of takes, and it depends on, how quickly we get there. I think it's very hard to put a number on the takes. We don't do that many simply because there isn't that much time. I mean, you just have to move on. And the actors are so good, that you don't really need that many takes. I always love to have a few takes because I take the first take to tweak. But yeah, I think generally I would probably say maybe three, 4 takes, but I don't think it's...
Yeah, I mean, first of all, the actors are so spot on that in some ways you have to assume that you are only getting a couple takes, not because they won't give it to you, but we, as Fabian said, we don't really have the time, and so it's really limited to that. And a lot of these scenes are long scenes, actually. Depending on what they are, even the two-handers can be a 6-page scene or more complicated sequences in terms of basic coverage. But the way it's scheduled, we because of the limited amount of time, there's no opportunity to really overshoot it, basically. We have to be pretty precise in terms of how we cover things, generally.
A question, I mean, is there any particular episode that you have very fond memories of because of, I don't know, like the setting, the preparation, something unexpected that happened and you were able to turn into a way that you maybe did not expect at all? Is there anything where you feel like, wow, that was really, really a great shoot? It might also be a scene?
I mean, I think for me personally, I would say it's probably Hard Home, just because it was so freaking hard to shoot that. And I still can't believe that we actually managed to get all these beats that we had to get. I think that's, yeah, and it was also, I mean, it was such a fun shoot. I had a great time during those 2 weeks. So. But it's it's like Jonathan said before, it's so nice to work with a good script and really good actors. And sometimes if you do a scene in Game of Thrones, which is just between two actors who are really playing off each other with great dialogue, that's just as much fun. So.
Yeah, and actually also that you were there as the first witness or the first audience, really, on a performance. And sometimes even the writing, you kind of, it's an interesting scene, but you don't necessarily get the significance of the scene until you see actually the performance. And then so, those are some of my experiences where a scene initially, when I read it, was kind of interesting, and then it became something more after the actors got their hands on it. And so, but I can't say for myself that there's any particular episode or essence. I mean, really, for me, it's just it's the overall when I step back and realize, how fortunate I feel to be able to work with all these great people and be involved in such a great story. So.
What was the first scene you shot for Game of Thrones? Do you remember that? Or the first episode? You've done quite some season.
Yeah, it's kind of a bit strange. It was I was flown in to sort of get the lay of the land. I wasn't, supposed to, this was about a month before I was actually officially to start. And I had just landed and literally, I was a bit groggy from jet lag. And they said, oh, by the way, do you mind shooting the scene tomorrow? It's a scene, it was a, I've forgotten the characters' names already. It's in Dragonstone with Stannis and
the other guy.
The woman.
The red
woman, basically. And it's just a night scene. Again, two-hander, but I'd never obviously worked with anybody, and so I had to sort of adapt myself very quickly to it, but it was fine.
Moving back to you guys here. Okay, we start here in the front, in the corner.
Hi there. Are there any particular films or television series that you guys watched like growing up that really inspired or informed the way you approach cinematography?
That's the most impossible question to answer.
Just name a few, just a little few.
Okay, I'll start.
There you go. Thanks.
I would say Storaro was probably my biggest influence, just because he, I don't know, for some reason his work was so profoundly striking and unusual, particularly 1900, which I think is his best film. Just the way in which his light was naturalistic but expressionistic. Again, sort of somewhat pretentious term, but it's the only way I can describe it. It's sort of like if you had it was interesting because I always thought, his sunsets, for example, were really saturated orange sunsets, and the cool tones in the shadows were very, very cool, and there's very amplified in some way. So, but at the same time, the contrast ratio, the quality of light was still representative of something of the light being very realistic, and yet he's lighting it. So it was one of those things where I was really moved by and really influenced by. And I remember early on as a cinematographer, I'd always ask, how would Vittorio do this scene? Of course, having no idea how to do it. But so, yeah, I would say he was probably a great influence. But, there are so many cinematographers and so many films that are inspirational. Forget about art, music, all these other things that are incredibly important as a cinematographer, I think. So.
Next question, here in the middle. We can have 2 mics already going because they can try to get another 4 to 5 questions before we have to wrap up.
Hello, I currently study film at Fabian's old school actually, and I was wondering what kind of advice do you have to give to young cinematographers, both of you?
I mean, look, it's always a tricky question to answer, but I think in general, from what I've learned over the years, you just have to be prepared to work very hard. If you want to go into film, I think you just have to love what you do. You have to love working in the industry, and it is a great industry to work in. So I think just enjoying doing it and shooting as much as you can. The more you shoot, the more mistakes you make. And only by making mistakes is when you learn. And I always believe that, you make your own luck. So, and you need a lot of luck in this industry. You have to meet the right people at the right time. Or for your show to come out at the right time, for example. My perfect example, for example, is Sherlock. That for me, that show, I got onto that show by luck, basically. I didn't really know the director. I got the interview. I was good enough in the interview to get the job, and then, the timing was perfect, and it went down very well, and that, opened up new doors. So I think just be yourself, learn as much as you can every day. You can shoot stuff every day. It doesn't matter what camera you use. I talk to a lot of students now, and everybody's always complaining about, oh, we don't have an Alexa at the film school, or we don't shoot Super 16 anymore. It's not about the format. It's about getting comfortable with a camera or with camera operating, for example. And it doesn't matter what camera you operate, it's doing it is going to make you better. So it's kind of sometimes, I think these days, just leaving those idealistic ideas behind and just using what you have and just taking advantage of that. And always surround yourself with people that push you and that you can push. And that's going to help you a lot as well.
That sounds great. You want anything to add to that, Jonathan, or shall we move on with the next question?
No, I think...
It sounds like a perfect answer to me. 2 questions here, maybe 2 mics straight away, so we can put a little bit quicker one after the other. There's another question here, maybe the second mic.
Okay, hi. I would like to know how you choose who is going to shoot which scene. Do you get assigned to special scenes? Because from what we saw, it doesn't look like maybe Fabian always shoots in the north or always does scenes with the character Daenerys, but both of you do that. So how do you, or maybe do you sometimes read the script and go, I really want to do that scene, or is it assigned to you?
It's pretty much assigned to you. So, it's like I was saying before, the great thing about doing the show is that you go in and you're going to be shooting these 2 episodes, and usually they're connected episodes. This is really what's happened in the last couple of years. I mean, before that, there'd be occasional time where you'd only do 1 episode. Some program may come in and just do 1 episode or what have you, and same with the director. But generally speaking, you have a 2-hour story to tell. And again, you're working with the director and the AD together to tell that story. And you travel to all those locations or those set pieces as if it was your own film. So that's one of the probably the most effective ways of retaining consistency throughout the episode or episodes. The bigger arc is another question, but that's more related to communication between cinematographers. I don't know how much the directors communicate with each other, but the cinematographers do quite a bit, and it's through that process we talked about. So certainly there are times where you're reading the episodes of someone else's scenes and you go, I want to do that scene, but again, it's more sort of like being in a candy store and selecting, getting what you get, but it's pretty great candy regardless. So,
go ahead.
Directed it yourself, Fabian. Which do you prefer doing in terms of television drama? A series that you are DOPing every episode of, like you did with Sherlock, or just coming in for the odd couple episodes with, like, Game of Thrones?
I mean, Sherlock's a little bit different because Sherlock was 3 90-minute movies. So, I mean, personally, I would never want to do 10 episodes of one season. I mean, on Game of Thrones, that would be totally impossible anyway, just dictated by the way that we shoot it, but also it would just be way too much for one person to shoot. And, the great thing is, for someone like me, I'm very lucky to be working with someone like Jonathan, I mean, so it's a great, I mean, I've learned a lot from Jonathan, and, it's amazing to have the opportunity to be able to exchange ideas and to talk about things, and, so I know a guy who's just shot a whole 10 episodes on something, and, I mean, first of all, he's totally knackered, and he's probably not going to get out of bed for 2 months. Yeah. I think it's just too much, it means you can't prep properly, it means, it just becomes a sausage factory that I don't really want to do anyway.
One last question we have time for, and
I've got the microphone.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So just one question, how is your communication with your gaffer? So is it like, we need a butterfly here, or is it like, I don't know, it's 12 o'clock in the midday and light what you want?
I think all the cinematographers on the show are pretty specific about what they need. That's not to say that our gaffers do make recommendations for alternative choices, because either for practicality reasons or what's more efficient. But in general, we're all very specific about what we need. It becomes interesting if we're sharing a stage set, for example. One cinematographer will come in and essentially get it pre-lit, generally for what they need, but that's where the communication is very important, because depending on how quickly the turnaround is, if there's not enough turnaround, we might have to, we usually communicate with each other to make sure that if we can, that at least instruments will be ready for when the next cinematographer comes in. Doesn't always happen, there's been some nicking of equipment occasionally, but it's important communication between the gaffer and the DOP. So.
A show that has so much to do with power and with characters ranging from 2 or 3 meters high to Tyrion Lannister. How do you retain who has the power in the scenes when you shoot them?
No idea.
We don't. I don't think we necessarily consciously think that way. It's just sort of what seems to be would feel right, and I would imagine subconsciously the director and the DOP would, if they want to give that impression, might lower the camera or whatnot. But it's generally more of just more of a stylistic choice of framing that, as opposed to being taking it literally, I guess. There's just some simple aspects, when you frame a giant, you have to make sure that they're in the frame. So simple things like that, where you need to help tell the story of how big that giant is more of a process of figuring out how you frame something within the frame to give that impression, but actual emotional power or that kind of thing is something it's a pretty subtle thing for us. So
it also happens, I think, subconsciously when you line up a shot and then it only comes across later when you see the shot in combination with the music, for example, or whatever's around it, that makes it much more deliberate.
So this was a session not only about shooting and working on cinematography for a series, but also we learned that it's good to work a lot and make a lot of mistakes, because that's the best way to work, to surround yourself with people who can push you, to work with great teams and to be able to learn from each other. And last but not least, also to shoot and be able at the same time to reduce candles when shooting. Thank you very much, Jonathan. Thank you very much, Fabian.